On a bitter March day in 1531, a man was shoved into a cauldron of boiling liquid, alive. His screams pierced the air, his skin blistered. He thrashed until he was too weak to move. Sitting nearby from his palace was the most powerful man in England, the man who had ordered this, King Henry VIII. This wasn't a traitor or a foreign spy being executed. It wasn't a high-born noble caught in political intrigue. It was a cook, a man named Richard Roose. And his crime? Poisoning porridge. Yes, this really happened. And no, it wasn't normal. In fact, it was so shocking that Henry VIII had to write an entirely new law just to make this punishment legal. This is the horrifying true story of one of the only people in England to be boiled alive by law. To support our channel, please click subscribe. Tudor England was a place of deep superstition, religious tension, and ever-present death. The 1530s were a particularly volatile time. Henry VIII was still married to Catherine of Aragon. His obsession with having a male heir was spiralling. The English Reformation was beginning to stir, and the country was teetering on the edge of chaos. Against this backdrop, food wasn't just nourishment, it was a source of fear. Rumours of poisonings were common. There were no reliable tests, no real science, just suspicion. If someone died suddenly, fingers pointed straight to the kitchen. It's in this atmosphere that we find Bishop John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, a prominent church figure and outspoken opponent of the king's marriage annulment. He lived in a large household with many guests and servants, including one cook named Richard Roose. One day porridge was served at dinner. This was a popular meal, hearty and filling, but this time something was wrong. Soon after eating it, several people became violently ill, and 2 of them died. Notably, Bishop Fisher had not eaten the porridge himself. Within hours, suspicion fell on Roose. He had prepared the meal, and he allegedly left the kitchen unattended. We know very little about Richard Roose, except that he was a cook of modest standing. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't well connected. He was a servant, an expendable figure in a brutal social hierarchy. But according to reports, Roose admitted to tampering with the porridge, not with arsenic, not with belladonna, but most probably with a herb that would cause purging and vomiting. In other words, he may have just thought he was playing a prank, putting a laxative in the porridge, a nasty one, but not fatal. Unfortunately, 2 people did die. And when people die from your cooking, especially in a bishop's household, the consequences are swift and severe. Roose was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, but instead of facing trial, something unprecedented happened. King Henry VIII had heard about the incident, and he was furious. Why? Because it struck fear into the hearts of his court. If a bishop could be poisoned in his own home, what about the king? Henry already feared betrayal, and this event struck the most intimate vulnerability, his food. And there was another layer. Bishop John Fisher wasn't just any cleric, he was an outspoken critic of Henry's divorce, a man allied with Sir Thomas More and the conservative wing of the church. Was this a plot? Was Roose a pawn? Historians still debate whether Henry saw this as an assassination attempt or simply an opportunity. Either way, he acted. There was no law on the books allowing someone to be boiled alive for poisoning, so Henry VIII made one. He rushed through an emergency act of Parliament, later called the Poisoning Act of 1531. It declared that any person who shall maliciously and wilfully poison another shall suffer pains of death by boiling. No trial, no jury, no appeal. It was swift, it was public, it was terrifying. On the 5th of March 1531, the sentence was carried out at Smithfield, a public square in London used for executions near to a nearby market. A massive cauldron was prepared, filled with most probably water or even oil or possibly molten lead. The records are unclear. Fires were lit beneath the cauldron. The crowd gathered in horrified fashion. This was not a normal execution. This was something medieval, even by the standards of the Tudors. When Roose was brought to the square, he reportedly cried out in panic, knowing what was before him. His hands were bound, and then he was lowered into the boiling cauldron alive. One witness said, he, as in Richard Roose, roared mightily loud, and divers pregnant women, who were with children, did swoon at the sight of seeing him seething. He was held under, pulled up, screamed, pushed back down. This continued many times. This was not justice, it was a public performance, a public execution, and a warning to would-be poisoners, and perhaps a message to the political enemies of King Henry VIII. This is what happens to those who threaten me. The boiling of Richard Roose shocked the nation. Even in an age of beheadings, hangings and drawing and quarterings, this felt excessive. The Poison Act of 1531 remained in law for a number of years, but was used again just once. Roose was the only man to be executed in this way under English law, with the other victim of a boiling being a woman. But what about the alleged victims of Roose's crimes? Well, these were simply people who had attended the court of Bishop John Fisher for charity. They wanted food to help them survive, and they'd been killed in their quest for it. Their deaths are overshadowed entirely by the method of execution. Even more curiously, Bishop John Fisher, the target, wasn't poisoned. He lived for 4 more years, until Henry VIII had him executed for opposing the king's supremacy over the church. Some historians argue that Richard Roose may have been a scapegoat. Others suggest he did add something to the porridge, but never meant to kill anyone. A few go further, questioning whether the victims even died from poison at all, and some even point their fingers towards the king. In an era with poor hygiene and no medical knowledge, foodborne illnesses could kill just as easily. The fallout from the Roose execution extended beyond just one man's gruesome death. It transformed how the elite viewed food security. Royal households began using tasters, trusted servants who sampled dishes before the monarch did. Servants in noble kitchens were watched even more closely. Herbs, spices, and unknown ingredients came under suspicion. Antidotes, most of them ineffective, were even kept nearby. And at court, the incident reinforced a chilling message. Henry VIII was not a man to cross. Boiling a man alive wasn't about punishing a cook. It was about showing the kingdom and his enemies that Henry ruled not only with divine right, but with absolute, unquestionable terror. Today we remember King Henry VIII for many things: his 6 wives, his break from Rome, and his appetite for power. But tucked away in the shadows of his reign is the tale of Richard Roose, the cook who became an example, a man boiled alive for an unproven crime, a law written overnight, used once and once more, and a haunting reminder of what absolute power truly looks like. So next time you're cooking porridge, think back to Tudor England, and be glad you're not living under King Henry VIII's kitchen rules. Thanks for watching. If you thought this story was wild, please make sure to click subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.